All right, let's jump right in. Today we're going deep on excerpts from Balancing Individual and State.
Yeah, interesting stuff.
It's amazing how much the relationship between individuals and states has changed in international law.
Definitely.
It wasn't that long ago that individuals were basically invisible on the world stage, like they weren't even really considered.
It's true. For centuries, international law was just about states. It was their game.
Huh.
Individuals were basically just along for the ride with almost zero options if their rights were violated.
It's hard to even imagine that now with human rights being such a huge part of international relations.
Right.
What caused that change?
Well, I think a lot of it stems from the horrors of World War II.
Ah, yeah, I see that.
The sheer scale of human suffering during that war. I mean, it really forced the world to confront the need for individual rights protections.
Yeah. And then, of course, the creation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UDHR, in 1948. That was a huge moment.
Absolutely a landmark.
But, some people might say it's all a bit idealistic. Good in theory, but does it actually work in practice?
It's funny you should say that because the UDHR isn't actually legally binding. It's not a treaty.
Oh, interesting.
But its influence goes way beyond its legal status.
Mm.
It's more like it's become a moral compass for the international community.
Okay.
It's inspired tons of human rights movements all over the world.
So it's kind of like a blueprint for a more just world.
Exactly, a blueprint. And even though it's not binding, it's had a huge influence on tons of human rights treaties that are legally binding, and it's even been incorporated into the constitutions of many countries.
Ah. So it's more about setting a global standard, like a benchmark for how states should treat their citizens.
Precisely. And sometimes we even see that standard being surprisingly upheld in international courts.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for example, there's a case from 2016, the ICC's conviction of Jean-Pierre Bemba.
Okay.
It really showed that even really high-ranking officials can't escape international justice.
Bemba, now he was a politician, right? From Congo.
Yeah, from Congo. And he was convicted of crimes against humanity for some truly horrific things done by troops under his command.
Wow.
And what makes this case so interesting is it demonstrates the reach of the ICC. It extends beyond, just the direct perpetrators. They're going after the people in charge who are responsible for preventing or punishing these crimes, but didn't.
So it's about accountability at all levels, not just those who carry out the crimes, but also those who, I guess you could say, enabled them.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
That's a crucial part of international criminal law. And the Bemba case really emphasizes how individual accountability is evolving on a global scale.
Yeah, I can see that. And just the fact that a powerful politician like Bemba was held accountable. I mean, that sends a message to leaders everywhere that they're not above the law.
For sure. It
Yeah,
sets a precedent. Your actions have consequences.
that's pretty powerful.
It is.
Now, balancing individual and state also delves into something called group rights, which I have to admit I'm not totally clear on. What does that even mean?
Well, this is an area where international law is still developing. We've made huge progress in recognizing individual rights, but the question of protecting the rights of groups, think indigenous communities or ethnic minorities, that's much more complicated.
Yeah, it's got to be a tough balancing act, ensuring that group rights are protected without stepping on the rights of individuals within that group.
It is. One of the toughest challenges is actually just defining group.
Hmm.
What makes a group for international law? Is it ethnicity, language, religion, something else?
Right, right. And then who speaks for the group? How do we make sure everyone's voice is heard and everyone's interests are represented fairly?
Those are all really important questions.
Yeah.
There's no easy answer, but the growing recognition of group rights shows that international law is becoming more inclusive, more aware of the different needs of diverse communities worldwide.
Hmm. Now, this makes me think about self-determination.
Okay.
Would you consider that a group right?
That's a tricky one. Self-determination is usually about the right of a people to decide their political status, like their form of government. But it's very closely tied to group rights, especially for indigenous people seeking autonomy or even independence.
So, while traditionally self-determination was all about decolonization, now it's more about the rights of marginalized groups within existing states.
Exactly. A good example is the ongoing struggle of the Catalan people in Spain. They want more autonomy. That's a modern example of how self-determination is being used to address the needs of specific cultural and linguistic groups within a larger country.
That's a good point. Self-determination is definitely taking on new meanings in the 21st century.
It is.
Yeah.
And it highlights how international law is always evolving to meet new challenges and incorporate new perspectives.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot. Individual rights, the UDHR, the ICC holding powerful people accountable, group rights, even self-determination. Anything else we should cover about this shift from states to individuals before we move on?
One more crucial concept we should discuss, and it's a bit of a head-scratcher. The right to have rights. It gets to the heart of the relationship between individuals and states.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. The right to have rights. I don't even know what that means.
Well, it was an idea put forward by political philosopher Hannah Arendt.
Okay.
She argued that the most fundamental right isn't free speech. It's not even the right to a fair trial. It's the right to belong to a political community, a state that recognizes and protects your other rights.
So are you saying that if you're not part of a state that respects your rights, you basically have no rights?
Pretty much, yeah. You become unbelievably vulnerable, no legal protections, open to all sorts of abuse. It's a sad reality for millions of stateless people all over the world.
That's a tough reality to face. I can't imagine how powerless you must feel without that basic recognition, without being seen as a person with rights.
It's a terrible situation. And a good example is the Rohingya people in Myanmar. They're denied citizenship, denied basic rights. They face persecution and displacement. Their story is a powerful illustration of just how vital it is to have a state that recognizes and protects your most basic rights.
It makes you realize that even though we've come a long way in promoting individual rights, there's still a lot of work to do to make sure everyone has that most basic right, the right to have rights.
You got it. And that work requires a fundamental change in how we see the role of states and the very nature of international law. We're shifting from a system that's all about states to one that puts individuals at the center.
Okay, I really want to unpack that further, but I think that's a good place to pause for now. Welcome back. Last time, things were getting pretty intense. We were talking about how international law is becoming more focused on individuals, giving them more say on the global stage.
Yeah, it's an interesting evolution for sure. But like with any big change, there are going to be hiccups, maybe even some growing pains along the way.
Exactly. So let's get into those challenges. Where are the sticking points, the places where things get a little rough?
Well, even with all these amazing laws and institutions meant to protect individual rights, one of the biggest hurdles is actually enforcing them.
Right, because it's one thing to have laws written down, but actually making sure those laws are followed consistently all over the world, that's a whole different ballgame.
You got it. States still hold a lot of power, and they don't always, let's say, play fair, especially when it comes to their own internal issues.
It's that whole sovereignty thing, right? Countries get really touchy about letting international organizations or courts butt in on what they see as their own business.
It's this constant tug of war between state sovereignty and individual rights. A good example is what's happening in Syria. The human rights abuses there are just awful, no question. But getting the international community to agree on a unified response, let alone actually intervene effectively, that's been a nightmare.
It's like everyone agrees that something needs to be done, but no one can figure out what that something is or who should be the one to do it.
That's it, exactly. And then you've got the issue of national interests, which often, unfortunately, end up trumping human rights concerns. Countries put their own political or economic goals first, even if it means turning a blind eye to some pretty terrible things happening elsewhere.
It's kind of cynical, I guess, but I mean, it's realpolitik, right? The world doesn't always run on morals.
Sadly, no.
Yeah.
But I think even with these challenges, the idea of focusing on individuals is gaining ground. The fact that we're even having these discussions and holding states accountable, even if it's not perfect, that's progress.
So it's slow going, maybe a bit messy, but at least we're heading in the right direction.
That's my take on it, yeah. But there's another wrinkle we need to consider. A lot of the big global problems we face today, things like climate change, pandemics, cybercrime, they don't fit neatly into the way we've traditionally thought about law.
They're not limited by borders, so those traditional international law approaches that are all about state-to-state relations, they're not really equipped to deal with them, right?
Exactly. It's not enough for countries to just play nice with each other. We need new ways of doing things, new institutions, and a much, much higher level of global cooperation to actually tackle these transnational challenges effectively.
So in a way, these big global problems are forcing us to rethink the very foundation of international law. It's not just about states signing treaties anymore. It's about finding ways for the entire world to work together for the good of all humankind.
That's a great way to put it. And I think technology is a huge part of this shift. We're connected like never before,
Yeah.
and that's changing how individuals engage with these global issues.
Yeah. Social media gives people a voice, a way to get organized and make a difference in ways we couldn't even imagine a few decades ago. It's almost like we're seeing a democratization of international relations.
Exactly. Look at the Arab Spring uprisings. Social media was crucial in those movements. It let individuals connect, share information, and even challenge entire regimes. It was a powerful example of how technology can give individuals the power to demand change on a global scale.
It's pretty inspiring, but also kind of overwhelming. If individuals have this much power to shape global events, what does that mean for the way power works traditionally? Are we heading towards a world where states don't matter as much?
That's a question a lot of people are trying to figure out. I don't think states are going anywhere soon, but their role is definitely shifting. They're having to adjust to this new world where power isn't so centralized and individuals are more, well, demanding about having a say.
So it's less about states calling all the shots in international relations and more about finding ways to actually work with individuals in civil society.
Precisely. And technology is going to keep pushing this change forward. We're only scratching the surface of how things like artificial intelligence, big data, blockchain, all of that can totally reshape how we govern the world.
It's exciting and a little scary at the same time, isn't it? All this tech gives us amazing new tools to tackle these global problems, but it's not without risks. Think about the spread of misinformation or cyber attacks that could cripple essential infrastructure.
Those are serious concerns for sure. And it highlights the need to consider the ethics of how we develop and use these technologies. It's not enough to just create new stuff. We need to do it responsibly and make sure technology is helping people, not the other way around.
So it's all about finding the right balance, embracing the possibilities technology offers while being aware of the potential downsides.
Right on. And another crucial part of this shift is the need for global institutions that are more inclusive and representative.
Because right now, a lot of the power sits with a small group of states, mainly wealthy Western nations.
Exactly. We need to find ways to give developing countries and marginalized groups a real voice in shaping global policies and standards.
It's about making sure everyone has a place at the table, that decisions reflect the incredible diversity of viewpoints and interests in the world. Otherwise, we'll just end up with solutions that only benefit a select few.
That's exactly it. We're talking about a fundamental change in who holds the power, and that's bound to create friction. But I think it's a necessary shift if we're going to build a world that's more just, more sustainable, a world that works for everyone.
This is giving us a lot to think about, that's for sure. We've covered a lot. The challenges of enforcing international law, the role technology plays, the need for global institutions that represent everyone. I bet our listeners are feeling the same way.
I think so too.
Yeah.
It's a lot to process. But it's important to really grapple with these issues, to think critically about the challenges and the opportunities, and to start imagining what kind of world we want to create.
Well said. I think it's time for another break. Welcome back. It's the final stretch of our deep dive looking at how individuals are shaking things up in international law.
It's been a wild ride for sure.
We've gone from individuals barely even registering to them having a real impact on global affairs.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable how much things have changed.
And it feels like we're at this turning point.
I agree.
So as we wrap this up, what are the big takeaways for our listeners? What should they really remember from all this?
I think the core message is this. Individuals are no longer just bystanders in international law. They're actively shaping things, having a say,
Yeah.
and setting the agenda.
It's a total flip from that old idea that it was all about states.
Absolutely. And this shift, it's come from a bunch of things happening together.
Yeah.
Human rights law gaining traction, international courts being established, international organizations getting more clout, and of course, the whole technology explosion.
Yeah, tech has been a real game changer.
For sure.
It's given individuals access to information like never before and a way to connect and mobilize on a global scale.
Right.
I mean, just look at how social media has been used to expose human rights abuses, pressure governments, even spark protests and revolutions.
Exactly. Individuals can bypass the old gatekeepers now and deal directly with global issues.
It's like this new era of citizen diplomacy where everyday people can be agents of change.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But as we talked about, this shift to a more individual-centric system, it comes with its own set of headaches.
Right.
Enforcement is a major one. States are still super protective of their sovereignty, and global problems like climate change, well, they need a level of cooperation that's often really tough to get.
It always comes back to that tension between individual rights and what states want.
Yeah, that tension is built into the system.
Yeah.
And to handle it, you need constant communication, negotiation, and a willingness to compromise.
So it's about hitting that sweet spot where individual rights are protected, but states' legitimate interests are also respected.
You got it. And it's also about realizing that there's no single solution that fits every situation. The balance between individuals and states will probably look different depending on what's happening, the specific issue, and even the cultural norms of the places involved.
It's definitely a complex situation. Makes me wonder, with all this going on in international law, where's this balance heading in the future?
Tough to say for sure, but my guess is that we'll keep seeing more recognition and protection of individual rights. People are becoming more aware of their rights, more connected to each other, and more willing to demand change.
It's a movement that's really picking up speed.
Yeah.
I'm definitely curious to see how it all plays out.
Me too. But it's important to remember, progress isn't always a straight line.
Right.
There will be bumps in the road, challenges, even times where it feels like we're moving backwards.
True. But even with those setbacks, the fact that we're having these conversations, pushing the limits of international law and rethinking the whole relationship between individuals and states, that's progress in itself.
I agree. And in the end, I really believe this shift to a system that puts individuals first has the potential to make the world a fairer, more balanced, and peaceful place for everyone.
That's a hopeful thought. So to wrap up our deep dive, what's the one thing you'd like our listeners to think about? What's that final food for thought to leave them with?
Here's what I'd say. The future of international law isn't set in stone. It's being shaped right now by what individuals, communities, and governments all over the world are doing, the choices they're making. So stay informed, stay involved, and don't be afraid to speak up. You have a part to play in creating the kind of world you want to live in.
Powerful stuff. Thanks for being with us on this journey exploring how individuals and states are finding their place in a changing world.
It's been great.
It's been a fascinating and insightful discussion. And remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Keep learning, keep asking those tough questions, and keep pushing for a better world.